As far as books and so forth are concerned, the good news for me is that at least legally and in terms of use and trade, English is the language.
Yeah.
So English is the language used in instruction in classrooms. A challenge is that when someone comes to us, they don't always know English so well. I mean, they've used it, and even their educational system, they'll use English, but it's kind of a something they use. Mike mentioned pictures. I'm surprised in Uganda, a lot of people read English as if they were reading pictures. They don't read phonetically, so they don't always understand the logic and structure of a sentence and how sentences and paragraphs work. So one of the things we have to do and what we structured into our curriculum was sort of an introduction to the English language and grammar and logic and those sorts of things. So, but we don't have nearly the language challenges, especially for me. I can use English as the language of instruction. Lots of books, that all the books that we require them to read are in English. The only struggle is, like I said, is that the level of English understanding it can vary a lot
Sure.
depending on the region you come from, and so forth. In fact, like we have a student now who's just married someone whose wife didn't have 10 years of education because there was a war in her region. So schools can be shut down for long periods of time, and students can have a qualification that doesn't matter because they don't remember what they studied. But it's a much less of a challenge, I think, for us than it is in China.
Wow. Douglas, what are things like in South America, Latin America? Where do things stand there regarding the availability of resources, and how is theological education engaged through the Mobile Theological Mentoring Corps in places where they don't understand English and we don't have enough teachers to speak in Spanish?
Yeah, thanks. When we go to places, well, first of all, as far as materials are concerned, there are some countries that have been really good at getting translations of Reformed materials. The Igreja Presbiteriana do Brasil has been, it's a 1 million member denomination in Brazil, Reformed and Presbyterian in its roots. And therefore, there's been a tremendous effort to translate books from English and Spanish, as insofar as there are books, into Portuguese. So that's available there. With regard to Spanish, there are more and more materials that are getting translated. You see things popping up all the time, new books that have been translated recently into Spanish. I think that and there are some good organizations like Clear that are doing some of that translation, and some other organizations as well. So I think that that's good. Unfortunately, as Mike can testify, and I'll tell you what, some of the best Christian bookstores I've ever been anywhere in the world, hands down, and that's compared to the United States, have been in China.
Mm-hmm.
There was, before the government closed one down, there was nothing like that, nothing like it on the face of this earth for a Christian bookstore that was full of all kinds of really good, solid Reform materials that had been, they had Calvin's Institutes translated into Chinese there. So there were plenty of books. I think that, but Mike, what that did is the more the things get translated, that's what then, as these translations are taking place, who's doing it? How qualified are they to do it? Mike has worked with a lot of seminary students who are over here in the United States who have a little bit of time to work on getting quality books translated. But on the other hand, it's just like the Christian bookstores over here. You walk into back when they actually did have a lot of Christian bookstores in the United States, you'd walk in there and what would you find? Mostly theologically Arminian material, or, how to on the Christian life that's basically moralistic and not very Christ-centered, if you know what I mean, in its approach to understanding the scriptures. And likewise, just as in the United States, it seems to be that the people who we would consider to be maybe theologically and scripturally a little more impoverished seem to have more money to get their books published. It's that way all over the world. People whose books we wouldn't put in anyone's hand have a lot of money, it seems, to get their books translated into Spanish or into some other language and put out there on the bookshelves. So it's not the good stuff. It's the popular stuff a lot of times that is being put into people's hands. And I want you to think about it from this perspective. Over here, you can have a mature Christian who picks up a popular book. And when I mean mature, I'm talking about a believer who's read the Bible at least several times in their life and is continuing to be committed to reading the Bible regularly, who even if they didn't grow up in a Christian family, they're a person who is self-consciously trying to figure out how to have a Christian family, and they live in somewhat of a covenantal context because they're actively involved in a church where there are other believers trying to live the Christian life. In other words, when they pick up that popular book, no matter what weaknesses might be in it, they're able to read that popular book in the bigger context of their understanding of the Bible, the confession and catechisms, and the Christian church they're part of. You take that popular book and you stick it in some other country where people aren't very literate. Charles hasn't mentioned the literacy rate in Uganda is 66%. That's 1/3 of the population does not have the reading level of a 15-year-old. Okay? So even when they are reading their Bible, let's say they're reading it in English, that may be their third language. That may not even be their second language. There was this village language, and then there was this other language that's more universal, and then English is their second or third. And if they're reading the Bible, they're reading it very slowly, very carefully, because they don't understand the vocabulary, they don't understand the words. And they certainly don't live in a context where there is a church that has been self-consciously thinking about how a Christian lives in this world as a Christian. And now they're reading this popular book. And so rather than reading the popular book in the context of a broader, more mature Christianity, that popular book becomes the framework out of which they're going to understand everything else they're reading. So, not to name names, just think of any popular book you want to out there in the Christian market and imagine that becomes the framework of the Christian life. And then you're reading Calvin in that framework rather than reading that popular book in the framework of Calvin. It's completely upside down. And we don't often think of that kind of perspective for the kind of stuff that's out there. So, the churches, for instance, in South and Central America, and there are a couple of good, solid, there are seminaries that are trying to be solid in South America, maybe one or two, but particularly in Central America, they are trying to get that stuff published, but it's still being worked on. It's not out there. The popular stuff's out there, but it's the Calvin's commentaries, the other solid books that we consider real framework books are much slower as far as they're coming to the foreground.